Yes, you're still watching Daybreak. We continue with a news review looking at the issues behind the headlines. And of course, the biggest story has to do with land, whether riparian land, whether land on Mau Forest, whether land where the SGR had to pass, and quite a number of issues. And land is always a hot potato in Kenya. NLC, the National Lands Commission chairman, Mohamed Swazuri, yesterday was arraigned. And he became the biggest casualty of the alleged illegal payment of millions of shillings for land acquired to build the standard gauge railway. And the argument is that this was public land owned by Kenya Railways, but because of the anticipation of the construction of the railway, it ended up in private hands, and those people who now claimed ownership were demanding compensation, and they eventually paid out about 221 million shillings. Something similar is happening in the Mau Forest, that people who encroached on forest land are now demanding for compensation. Yesterday, CS for Environment Keriako Tombiko appeared before members of the National Assembly and said simply there will be no compensation for anyone, much to the chagrin of quite a number of MPs, especially from the Rift Valley, because the CS says this is government property, this is public land. Even if it ended up in private ownership, it is still public land. So how do you claim compensation from government? Now this, it appears, has been the biggest problem, that people ended up claiming to own public land and now demanding compensation from government. Is this something we can actually resolve in the next few years? Because quite a lot of public land, even in the city, is in private hands. Bwana Mathuki.
You know, one thing we must appreciate and acknowledge is the government itself is appreciating that corruption is a big issue, and now land happens to be now in that. And the fact of the matter is that for so long, and we know it, the Ministry of Lands and so forth and stuff have been so much into this, and people taking advantage of this. And Mau, of course, is obviously one of them, and so is Nairobi. And now the fact that government has acknowledged is a problem, and I think that should be the beginning point, is how do we undo all those things? And I think that's the biggest challenge. For so many years, we've seen now Mau in trouble, how they're going to reverse it. I saw, of course, the CS Environment saying they're going now to cancel the title and issue one big title for Naroko County and that kind of a thing. So the challenge here is that now, how do they sustain this? Are they going to ensure they will do, or they only talk and that is the end of it? So it's about now taking action. Whatever they do, they must action it. And I think that is what the problem is. It's doable, but it's an issue. How do they now, how does it happen when? And that's what the problem is.
But I think the bigger issue is the magnitude of the problem, that public land is not properly governed across the country. Even that land that is supposed to belong to the Kenya Railways can very easily find itself in private hands. Yesterday there were stories about the fact that many county councils, municipal councils, which owned mayors' parlors, mayors' houses,
can't find them.
Cannot find them because all that land is grabbed now. Governors have to look for new land to build houses. It's the same problem we're having in Ruaraka. Is this something that we can actually resolve? Because the biggest issue is public land properly governed?
You see, there are a couple of things that we need to look at. First is the history of this problem. Remember when, before this new constitution, when the president had the powers to basically just give anybody he wanted land. As long as it belonged to the public, he could decide, cut out an acre, give it to so and so. So first, I think we have a lot of problems that started from that particular time, where you could exercise a forest, and I've had rumors about how it could be done in the past. You know, you just the president liked you just call the Ministry of Land and tell him, just give this guy 2,000 acres and so we have that problem. But then also though we changed that and affected that particular system using a new constitution, we didn't change the attitude of a lot of people who are in power or who are getting into power or who got into power. There are people who still have the hang-up of being able to do that. And for example, I look at the Mau Forest. Where I come from in Nyeri, we have guys who are thrown out of Kiandogoro Forest. That's slopes of as you go into the Aberdares. 30 years ago, they were literally thrown out. And in fact, they contacted me and the Member of Parliament from Teto recently when this Mau thing was going on. And I said, look, as guys were thrown out of this forest and nobody ever said anything. Now we are very upset to see guys being thrown out of Mau
You're
Forest.
actually discussing compensation in the National
And they're
Assembly.
like, hiya, what's going on? And you see, this is a problem because we also have a certain element of political manipulation. Because my understanding, I could be wrong, is that some of the issues that have been happening in Mau is over the years, just before every election, there's an escalation of the people who get into the forest. And if you're a politician, you understand what most is happening. Somebody is telling people, get into the forest.
Yeah.
When I get into office,
Yeah.
I'll make sure that where you are gets converted to property or finances. I talked to some of the security people who are involved in that, and they're telling us, some guys you're finding in the forest have one mabati, one strip of mabati. Then he's built a house around it. There's no way he lives in that house.
Yes.
So what he does, every time there's some noise, he comes and sits there and says, this is my house.
Yes, just waiting for the possibility
waiting
of
for the possibility of being removed, and he says, that was my house,
Compensation.
so you need to pay me. And I honestly cannot escape, I cannot move away from believing that there are politicians who are involved in encouraging these people to stay there on the promise that if you stay there, once you are removed from there, you will be paid. So these are people who are trying to get political benefit for their supporters.
Yes.
And why we have such a big problem, especially with the Maois, because when the government wakes up and says, we will not pay anyone. So now your supporters, who you made go and put up a Mabati structure, he's saying, even that loss of me coming and buying that one sheet of Mabati, who is going to pay for me? Because had you told me I couldn't get this land, I would never have done this.
And now you see your colleagues in Parliament because here the headline reads, Tobiko vexes Rift Valley MPs on Mau pay rejection. He put it bluntly, there will be no compensation.
Yes.
Now, but you can actually see another politician coming out so strongly to actually demand that these people be compensated. Don't you think that the National Assembly, in as much as you represent people, because you also represent an informal settlement in Nairobi where issues of land are also on a different level, don't you think that members of the National Assembly are also part of the problem?
It goes way up. The three things. One, it's a question of, this is politics, then it's impunity, and then there are people who just live out of speculation. Somebody knows SGR is going to come, there's going to be compensation. Some people sit somewhere and decide, we are going to put people in there, we will buy back this land from you. It's just simple politics and impunity. When you say it's members of parliament, yes, there are people who represent certain people, and they're there because these people vote for us. So go in there. You know there is going to be a time where you're going to be moved out. If you're going to be moved out, I as member of parliament, I will make the biggest noise. I agree and disagree with what Murkomen was saying. Murkomen was asking the question, these people were good when the president was looking for votes at that time. And then now when there was now time to try and save the environment, they're there illegally. So even the president himself, we allowed him for the action that he's taking. But at the time when votes are being looked for, from the president to us members of parliament, we contribute to this. Even where we stay in informal settlements, there are people who are staying in places, this is public land. When it comes to time to remove them, if you're going to remove them, you're going to have to ask for compensation. And this culture, like he said, it began during the time of Moi. At least now, you have to ask Parliament. I think I have seen a number of times when the Minister for Environment has said and published a Gazette notice, we want to remove this chunk of land for this purpose. Whether or not we as members of Parliament pay serious attention to the consequences and the need is another thing. But it has to go through Parliament. You have to give permission for that land to be removed.
But it appears that we just have to live with the fact that government has been wasting money buying its own land from private individuals, and it has happened over the years. What we are seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's true, and part of this problem is now where the same conversation we were having about buildings in Nairobi is the same one. It's just that the guy in Mau didn't put up a story building. He just moved in there and put up his small house. The guy in Nairobi put up a story building. But the concept is the same. You should not have had that land. You should not be in that land. It affects the ecosystem. But somebody didn't care. And somebody looked at the short-term gain of either political support. Because what my brother Oluchi is saying is the truth. When we are looking for votes, there are places we go and man, here, there's a problem. Not even that. You'll go and, we were making fun. But you will not
talk about the problem.
We were making fun that, you'll find even where boys go and do funny things, they're taking the kind of things, substances that should not be taken. But at that moment in time, if somebody tells you, you will go. You'll not start telling them, you guys should not be doing this. No, not at that moment in time.
This is vote hunting.
This is vote hunting. But then the problem we have is where deliberate, and I have to say this about when I look at this Rift Valley conversation going on, you can tell there's a deliberate political conversation going on, because these guys are refusing to accept that a mistake was done. Now, when I look at some of my colleagues who are saying, okay, so we agree, these guys should not be there, but why are you beating them up? It's moved from they should not be here to why are you removing them like this? And then you ask yourself, if you as a member of parliament actually went and told them to move, they would move. The reason they're refusing to move to the point where brute force is being used to move them is because their members of parliament are telling them, do not move.
Wow. It's a very interesting conversation, the fact that the government may have paid millions of shillings, that's why Swazuri is in court alongside other people, for land that it owns, for the construction of the SGR, and now members of the National Assembly demanding that the same government compensate people evicted from the Mau Forest as well. I want us to move to another headline as we wrap up our news review this morning, and that has to do with the conversation going on and the serious allegations of bribery against the National Assembly, and this has to do with the sugar report. I can see now opposition MPs are furious with the Minority Leader John Mbadi over his position on that report. Remember, John Mbadi was among the MPs who were most vocal. It's on page 6 of the Daily Nation. John Mbadi was one of the MPs who were most vocal in as far as ensuring that this report does not see the light of day. He has defended his position and says even if that report is reintroduced in the House today, he will stand by his words. But now this has actually elicited quite a backlash from members of his own party, the Wiper Party, as well as Ford Kenya. And there's even talk of the possibility of him losing his position as leader of minority. Do you feel that John Mbadi in particular, forget about the leader of majority, because this has had to do with even CSs. Do you think that the leader of minority betrayed his people in the National Assembly by coming out so strongly and to shoot down that the report?
In fact, it was very interesting to see somebody like Mbadi, a leader of minority in parliament, come out passionately in such a manner, while his members, is actually people voted him to become that in that position, and saying, no, you should have checked with us. And in fact, I wonder even what motivated him in the first place, as we go into the merits of the report and stuff. What actually motivated him to reject the report? And that didn't come out. He was only passionate and saying, no, we need to because in parliament, and the practice all over in every parliament, you cannot simply trash a report of a committee. You can either amend. There are some areas that you can say, yes, we need to amend these, we need to observe this. But simply coming and say, we reject this report in totality, that tells you a lot. And that's why actually Mbadi himself should be able even to tell, how does he himself, one, as a leader of minority, representing a coalition, honestly, which coalition is supposed to check even the executive of the government? And he comes out in such a manner without even justifying, without giving merits, without even qualifying what he's saying. And actually that's the problem is. I'm sure it may not just end there, and I'm sure members will be demanding at a time when the coalition will be sitting to ask what happened. He has to explain.
Yes, it is a privileged position, either leader of majority or leader of minority. For someone in that position to actually stand and shoot down a report, it's not the same as any other member of the National Assembly.
True. I mean, this applies for both the majority and minority leader. And when I listened to what Mbadi was saying about why he did not agree with his report, he actually did give his reasons. And one of the reasons was that he felt as if this report had been put together as a witch hunt and a cover-up. A witch hunt to some people and a cover-up to others. And I think also it's important for us to realize that it gets to the point where when you look at something that has been brought before the House, you as a member of parliament are looking at it from the point of, do I agree? You have the capacity to be able to say, do I agree with what you guys have done or not? I mean, when a committee is given a job to do, there are certain expectations, and I have said this before. This committee's responsibility came up from a question that was asked by Honorable Lesuda about it's at a very fundamental level. The question was, is the sugar we are using or that is being brought to us safe for consumption? So That's where you start from with this report. And unfortunately, when I went through this report, you don't get a very conclusive answer about that question. You get fingers being pointed about imports, about other things, which are also important. But at a very fundamental level, this was the question. And then when you read, the more you read that report, you keep thinking, okay, somebody was trying to run away from answering this question and bringing in other issues. So you bring in CSs, you bring in, there was first we saw the issue about companies, the question of who brought which sugar. The sugar that the CS, for example, of Interior said was not, had mercury, for example. We had CS for industrialization coming and saying there was no mercury. So you start seeing there's a conflict happening at much higher places. And then you ask yourself, did this committee get involved or take party or take sides in that conflict? Was there a situation where somebody was trying to defend someone? So when you read this report, for people who are not interested parties in this party, who had not been participants in the process of this committee, you came out of that thinking, guys, there's something wrong
so you feel
with this
like,
report.
for example, John Mbadi was right in
I personally think he was right, because you see, the fact that you're in opposition doesn't mean that everything that comes from government you must fight, or that anything that comes from opposition you must agree with. Because remember, you are still going to have to be accountable to basically the whole idea of integrity. If somebody brings something that is wrong, you can't say it is right because it was brought by opposition.
Yeah, this has actually seen him receive quite some backlash from especially members of his own party, ODM, of which you belong to. John Mbadi also comes, if not from the sugar belt, very close to the sugar belt. Most of the members in ODM and the minority side do come from that side of the country as well. He should have been a bit sensitive to the fact that the general interests that he represents and the party he represents in Parliament should be looked into. And the fact that MPs are saying they were not even consulted, they did not know that this probably, if the minority leader is speaking like this probably should be the party position. Don't you think that there's a problem there?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate position that Mbadi finds himself into is that, one, he's entitled to his opinion as an individual member of Parliament. And he can debate a matter from whatever conviction level he comes, and maybe that's why he says he agrees with him. But that is to the extent that he holds a personal opinion.
He is much bigger than his own person in Parliament.
The title that you see even on that headline is Minority Leader. And so from where some people are coming from, I think they seem to be saying Mbadi is a leader of minority of NASA, not just ODM. So the people from Wiper will be asking, was it this the position that we wanted to advance? More than that, as part of the leader of minority, he represents people who come from Western, out of which Mia Sugar went down. He represents people from South Nyanza. Sony Sugar is struggling. He represents people from Moroni and Chemelil. And the general feeling is that sugar factories have gone down. People's businesses, people's livelihoods, people who are able to take their kids to school can no longer take their kids to school. It's an entire economy of two regions. So when he spoke as leader of minority, people will be forgiven to think that the general good and the general mood was that there was something and we needed to know what happened. Unfortunately now, having thrown the report, we will never know, did the sugar have mercury or not? Was it safe? Was it not safe? There is a question about evasion of tax. We will never know how much taxation these people were supposed to pay. Why was this such an open-ended thing as opposed to the milk issue? Milk was regulated, there was a window, it was closed. In respect of sugar, it was not. We will never get to answer this question. We will never also get to make people face responsibility in terms of standardization, packaging, and all the things that went about how this thing was done. So I think that even though there was a larger issue they were trying to address, and I think it was Duale, was it Kenan and somebody else, the elephant in the house was that this issue touched on certain ministers. And then the report had to be killed. My view, like he said, is that we could have address that issue, like former agriculture minister, if he was never called. And then there is a question, how do you actually impeach, because they were saying that this would be tantamount to impeaching a cabinet secretary without following the constitution. Then let's look at the amendments. We had proposed amendments from Osotsi. We had proposed amendments from Gladys Wanga. We did not have to be so extreme as to throw the baby with the bucket. So that's why people have formed the conclusion that there was certain end that was determined even before we went. And I want to place this now at the doorstep of the Speaker himself, without imputing any improper motive. There are people who told me, and they were sitting next to me, you know, I was told that I'm going to speak. And indeed he spoke. And there are people who have complained that even the chair of the committee, yesterday I was with him in Radio Jambo, he said he walked to the Speaker and said, look, give this thing a balanced view. I have members of the committee who also want to give the other side of the story. Lo and behold, they never spoke. So there is the whole thing about this corruption thing, and people have said money exchanged hands. If the House and some members behaved in a dishonorable manner, the Speaker himself cannot be the Speaker of a dishonorable House without removing himself that, you know, me, I'm honorable. So even as he brings people to come and investigate this thing, we must also investigate high up. Somebody said that if a fish begins to rot, it rots from the top. We must look at this thing top from the leadership, starting from the Speaker, the leader of majority, the leader of minority, the chairmanship of the committees, and members of the committees. It cannot be that only members of the committee on this question of corruption.
For your information. And I want to give you, as you comment, this will be your final chance. Make it your final comment because our time is up. Yes.
You know, it's the leader of the NASA leader, the principal, both principals actually, both Raila and Kalonzo on record saying the weakest link of fighting corruption now as we speak is Parliament. And I think this was informed possibly by this report and action of somebody, Bandi, who never even checked with the rest, and that confirms that. Because as we were meeting as a party a week ago, the report we received was that indeed there are a number of issues, and these must come out in this report. So obviously the mood out there is that Kenyans were expecting what will come out of this report. Yeah, and again, even as we speak now, and as you read, we are not even sure what we are consuming is right. Only to be killed in Parliament, the Parliament that is supposed to protect the bigger interest of the public. And therefore, when the executive themselves, when the president himself says he's going head-on against corruption, and this even supported by the opposition, and then the Parliament that's supposed to be even checking the executive, instead of now supporting this, checking, they even go ahead and pull down this effort. It is actually looking very bad for Parliament, and it's high time now Parliament, I don't know what seems to be done. What I thought should have happened, we should have been to recommend this report for further investigation, because Parliament does not prosecute. It can only recommend. They should have recommended and said they call upon DCI, they call upon other agencies that are involved to investigate this matter, to make sure that Kenyans are consuming the right stuff. But if it is not like that, I'm telling you, the Parliament looks very bad. I don't know how they're going to redeem themselves from this.
We have members of the National Assembly here.
First and foremost, I do agree. This particular report and how it was managed does leave Parliament looking very bad. I think for me, my only problem with with this report was you got the impression that this report wasn't just about sugar. There were interests that were trying to fight about supremacy. There were CSs who were trying to put each other down. There were leadership even within Parliament that had interests that were trying to protect. And I think my position is, the fact that we threw out this report doesn't mean that the problems of sugar are solved. Doesn't mean that we do not need to do something about that issue of sugar. That's not what this report means. And I also think that we had expectations from different constituencies, and I use constituencies broadly. We had Western Kenya thinking that this report was going to answer their questions. We had certain people thinking that this report was going to bring in a certain CS. We had certain people thinking that this report was about a fight within government about which side of the government, Jubilee, is stronger than the other one. There were a lot of factors that went into this report, which is what interfered with the report. It stopped being about a report anymore. It became a competition between interests. I think what we need to do is go back, and ask ourselves, did we answer the question that we needed to answer about sugar? No, we did not. So who is going to actually answer that question? I don't think we are bound as Parliament. This issue doesn't have to die. It doesn't have to die. Okay. We can actually go back and get this thing done and redeem ourselves. At least those of us who did not get 10,000 and 20,000.
Yes, finally, I think it's not all lost. I think under the standing orders we can redeem ourselves. And we can do that by looking at standing order number 49. I think the Speaker has powers to review, or rather to enable Parliament to review. There is the standing order that says once a motion is debated and dealt with, either in the affirmative or otherwise, it cannot be brought back within 6 months. But the Speaker has the discretion, and under standing order number 49, I think somebody can bring up that question to the Speaker and tell him, based on public interest, based on health considerations and other things, and even on account of the fact that the decision itself was tainted. Even the House itself is indicted. For those reasons, I think the Speaker should relook at standing order number 49 and then go back and say, when we look at it, let's go the select way. Okay. Let us have a select committee of 7 from the Senate and from the National Assembly.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anthony Oluoch, MP Mathare, Peter Wathuki, Secretary General, Wiper, and Mujiru Wambugu, MP Nyeri Town, helping us look at the big headlines and the issues behind those headlines this morning. Matters to do with the land, matters to do with corruption, of course. It continues to be the biggest point of discussion. And still on that issue of corruption, Wahiga Mwaura will be hosting former Governance and Ethics Permanent Secretary John Githongo on this show today. In a short while, do stand by for that. We will also be getting a traffic update after this break.